Sewing room at the back of my grandmother's house smelled like cedar and old fabric and something else I could never quite name, maybe just time. She had kept every spool of thread she'd ever bought, organized by color in a shallow wooden tray that sat on the windowsill. And when the afternoon light came through the curtains, it turned the whole room amber. I used to sit on the floor in there when I was 7, 8, 9, just watching her hands move. She didn't talk much when she was working. She didn't need to. My grandmother's name was Frances. She went by Fran to everyone except my mother, who always called her Mom, and me, who called her Gram because that's what came out the first time I tried and it stuck. She had lived in the same house in Decatur for 51 years, raised 3 kids there, buried a husband there, kept a garden in the backyard that was more ambitious than it had any right to be given the Georgia clay soil. She was 83 when she died, and the night before the hospice nurse called to say it was close, I drove 4 hours from Nashville to be there. My older sister did not come. That's not exactly the beginning of this story, but it's close enough. My sister. I'll call her my sister because that's what she is, even now, even after everything, is 5 years older than me. We were never particularly close growing up. The way some sisters are close, the kind who share clothes and secrets and stay up late whispering. We were more like 2 people who happened to share a hallway. Polite to each other mostly, aware of the other's existence, not hostile. She left for college when I was 13, and after that, it felt like we were just 2 separate adults who happened to show up at the same holidays. She got married young, divorced at 31, had 1 daughter she was raising mostly on her own by the time Graham got sick. I'm not saying any of that to make her look bad. I say it because it's context. She had a harder life than I did in some ways, and I knew that. And I tried to hold on to that knowledge even when things got ugly. I'm a dental hygienist. I've been with the same practice in Nashville for 6 years. I have a partner named Joel and a 1-bedroom apartment and a very opinionated rescue cat named something I'll keep to myself because honestly, the internet doesn't need to know my cat's name. The point is, I'm a normal person with a normal life. And I'm telling this story not because I want attention or sympathy, but because I think a lot of people have been through some version of this and nobody really talks about what it feels like from the inside. My grandmother had 3 children, my mother, my sister, and my uncle. My mother died when I was 22, cancer, fast and brutal. And so by the time Graham was declining, it was really just my sister, my uncle, and me. My uncle lived in Phoenix and was not what you'd call emotionally available. He showed up for Christmas sometimes. He sent cards. He was not the kind of person you called when things got hard. When Graham started forgetting things, first just small things, where she put her reading glasses, whether she'd taken her blood pressure medication, it was me who started driving down on weekends to check on her. My sister was 3 hours away in Charlotte. She said it was hard with her daughter's school schedule. I said I understood. I drove down on weekends. This went on for about 2 years. I noticed something shifting in my sister around the time Graham's doctor started talking about the possibility of memory care. I can't point to one specific thing she said or did. It was more like a change in temperature. She started calling Graham more frequently, which I initially thought was a good sign. She started asking questions I hadn't heard her ask before. Had Graham updated her will recently? Who was handling her finances? Was the house still in Graham's name alone, or had anything been put in trust? I remember the first time she asked me about the will, I said I didn't know, and she said she was just asking because these things got complicated. I nodded and moved on. I filed it somewhere in the back of my mind under things to pay attention to later. The house was the main thing. Graham's house in Decatur was worth somewhere between $300,000 and $350,000, depending on who you asked and when. She paid it off years ago. She also had a savings account that she'd built carefully over decades. Not extravagant, but real. When she started needing more help, I was the one who helped her set up automatic bill pay. The one who drove her to the bank when she needed to go in person. The one who helped her find a financial advisor. I had a limited power of attorney for health decisions. Nothing financial. My grandmother was sharper than people gave her credit for. Even toward the end, when her memory was unreliable, there were these windows where she was completely herself, completely present. And in those windows, she was funny and precise and very clear about what she wanted. She told me once, about 8 months before she died, that she had spoken with her attorney and that the house was going to be handled the way she'd always planned. She patted my hand when she said it. I didn't ask her what that meant exactly. It felt rude to ask. Graham died on a Tuesday in February. It was cold, the kind of cold Decatur doesn't usually get, and the hospice nurse had called me the night before to say it would likely be soon. I drove down that night. I sat with her through the morning. She passed just before noon, quietly, the way she had done most things in her life. I called my sister first. She said she'd get there as soon as she could. She said she'd book a flight. I called my uncle in Phoenix. He said he'd look at flights. I spent the rest of that day making calls and signing forms and fielding questions from neighbors who knocked on the door with casseroles and kind eyes. The hospice team was gentle and efficient. The funeral home came in the late afternoon. By evening, I was sitting alone in Graham's kitchen, eating a piece of someone's pound cake and trying to figure out how a person goes from existing to not existing in the span of one Tuesday. My sister arrived the following morning. She hugged me at the door, and it was a real hug, not a performative one, and for a moment, I felt genuinely glad she was there. That lasted about 4 hours. She started going through the house that afternoon. I don't mean she was being disrespectful. She wasn't tearing things apart. But she was moving through rooms in a way that felt more like inventory than grief. Opening drawers, picking up objects and turning them over. She found a jewelry box in Graham's closet and spent a long time in there while I was on the phone with the funeral home. When she came out, she said, "Casual as anything. Did Graham ever tell you what she wanted to do with her jewelry?" I said Graham had mentioned a few specific pieces to me, things she wanted to go to particular people. I named them. My sister nodded and said, right, in the voice of someone who was not really listening. That evening, she started talking about the house. I was washing dishes. She sat at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and started in a roundabout way that eventually landed on, what were my thoughts about selling the house and splitting the proceeds? I said I didn't know what the will said, and we should wait. She said that was fair. But had I thought about it? Did I think it made sense to keep it? I said I hadn't thought about it yet because our grandmother had been dead for about 36 hours. She let it go for the night. The meeting with Graham's attorney was scheduled for the following Monday. The funeral was Saturday. In those days in between, I watched my sister like I was watching a weather system move in. She was attentive to everyone who came by, kind to the neighbors, gentle with Graham's oldest friend, patient with my uncle when he arrived from Phoenix looking lost. She was, by all appearances, a grieving granddaughter doing her best. And then, late Thursday night, I was in the sewing room. I kept going back there, I'm not sure why. Maybe just because it still smelled like Graham. And I was looking at the thread tray on the windowsill when my phone lit up with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was from a woman I'll call Graham's neighbor across the street. A woman in her 70s who had known Graham for 30 years and who did not own a smartphone in the traditional sense. She borrowed her granddaughter's whenever she needed to send a message. The message said, "I saw your sister sitting in her car outside the bank on Ponce this afternoon for a long time. Then she went in. I don't know if that matters, but I thought you should know." I read that message 3 times. Then I sat very still in the sewing room for a long time. I texted Joel that night and told him what I'd seen, and he said the same thing he always says when something is wrong, which is, "What do you need from me?" I told him I needed to think out loud, and he let me do that for an hour without interrupting, which is one of the reasons I am with that man. What I knew? My sister had gone to a bank. The bank that Graham used was on Ponce de Leon. My sister had no reason to be at that bank unless it was related to Graham's accounts, and she had no access to Graham's accounts, or she shouldn't have. What I also knew, I had helped Graham set up her accounts. I had driven her to the bank. I had sat next to her in the little office when she updated her information. I knew the branch manager's name. I had her attorney's number in my phone. I called the attorney's office first thing Friday morning. His assistant picked up. I explained who I was and that I had some concerns I wanted to raise before Monday's meeting. She put me through. The attorney, I won't use his name, listened to everything I said. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he asked me one question. Did my grandmother have a secondary signatory on any of her accounts? I said I didn't know. He said I should call the bank directly and ask to speak with the branch manager, explain that I had health POA from my grandmother who had recently passed, and request a hold on any transactions pending the reading of the will on Monday. I said, "Can I do that?" He said, "You can try. Call me back if you hit a wall." I called the bank. I asked for the branch manager by name. She remembered me. I had been in there with Graham 3 or 4 times over the past 2 years. I explained the situation. I explained my concern. I was very calm, which surprised me because on the inside, I was something else entirely. She put me on hold for 4 minutes. When she came back, she said there had been a transaction request made the previous day, a withdrawal request. It had been flagged by their system because it was above a certain threshold and because of the account holder's age and recent activity patterns. It had not yet been processed. She said given the circumstances, she was going to place a temporary hold pending legal review. I said, "Thank you." I hung up. I sat in my car in Graham's driveway. There was a mockingbird going absolutely insane in the magnolia tree by the porch, the way they do in February when everyone else is still quiet, just announcing itself to the whole empty street. I did not go inside and confront my sister. I thought about it. I sat there and thought about it for a long time and decided that whatever I did, I was not going to do it in Graham's house while Graham was barely 2 days gone. I was going to wait until Monday. I was going to let the attorney handle it. What I did do was take photographs. I photographed the jewelry box. I went through the house systematically when my sister went to pick up my uncle from the airport, and I documented every room. Not because I thought she'd taken anything, but because I wanted a record of the state things were in. I am not, by nature, a suspicious person. I had become one over the past 72 hours. I didn't love the feeling. The funeral was Saturday. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the funeral because it's not really the point of this story. And also because it was the kind of day that belongs to Graham, and not to what came after. There were more people than I expected, which shouldn't have surprised me. Graham had lived in that community for half a century. She knew everyone. She had quietly been important to a lot of people in the way that certain older women are, in ways you don't fully appreciate until they're gone. Someone brought apple cake. I ate 2 pieces standing in the church hall, and someone asked me if I was okay, and I said yes and meant maybe 40% of it. My sister gave a beautiful eulogy. I'm not being sarcastic. She spoke about Graham with genuine warmth, and I could see that she did love her, that the grief was real. People are not one thing. I knew that. It didn't make anything easier, but I knew that. Monday came. My uncle drove separately to the attorney's office. My sister offered to ride with me, and I said I was fine. I needed to make a call on the way. I drove alone with the heat turned up too high and the radio off. The attorney's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown. We sat in a conference room. There was a pitcher of water and paper cups. It felt very ordinary for the thing it was. The will was clear. The house and the savings went to all 3 grandchildren equally, my sister, my uncle, and me. That part was no surprise. Certain personal items were designated, the jewelry, some furniture, the sewing table. Those went to me. Graham had also left a small account specifically for her oldest friend, enough to help with her medical costs. That part made me cry in a way I hadn't managed to yet. After the attorney finished reading, he paused, set the papers down, and said there was another matter to address. He looked at my sister. He told her that the bank had placed a hold on a transaction that had been initiated on Thursday afternoon, a withdrawal request. He said the estate would need to review all account activity from the past 60 days and that he would be reaching out to the bank to do so. My sister's face didn't change immediately. It changed slowly over about 3 seconds, which felt much longer. She looked at me. I looked back at her. She said, "There's an explanation for that." The attorney said he was certain there was, and they would work through it together and that it would be part of the estate settlement process. My uncle, who had been sitting quietly through all of this, said nothing. He looked at the water pitcher. He poured himself a cup. The explanation my sister gave, eventually, was that she had thought, genuinely thought, she insisted, that Graham had wanted her to have access to the savings, that they had discussed it, that she had been operating on the understanding that this was what Graham intended. She said she had meant to mention it, but everything had been so overwhelming. I will not tell you I believed her, and I will not tell you I completely didn't believe her either. What I will tell you is that what matters is what the documents say, and the documents said something different. The attorney said this very gently and with great patience. The transaction was reversed. The estate was settled over the following 4 months, mostly through the attorney's office, mostly in writing. My sister and I did not speak directly for about 6 of those months. My uncle signed what he needed to sign and went back to Phoenix, and that was that. My sister and I have a relationship now. I would not call it close. I would call it honest, in a way it wasn't before, which is something. We text occasionally. We were in the same city last Thanksgiving and we had dinner, the 3 of us, her, me, her daughter, and it was fine. Not warm, but fine. Her daughter is 12 now and thinks I'm extremely boring, which I find endearing. I don't know what I expected to feel when it was all over. I think I expected relief, and there was some. But underneath the relief was something more complicated. a kind of grief for a version of a family I think I'd been carrying around without realizing it. A version where my sister was someone I could call in the hard moments, where the hard moments brought people together instead of showing you clearly where the seams were. The sewing room got packed up, and the house in Decatur sold 8 months after Graham died. My share of the sale went into a savings account. I haven't touched it. I'm not sure what I'll use it for. Something she would have approved of, I hope. Something that lasts. I have her thread tray now. It sits on my windowsill in Nashville. When the afternoon light comes through the curtains, it still turns amber. Some things hold. If you've been through something like this, I want you to know that the thing that helped me most was not anger. Even though anger was useful for a while, what helped most was being methodical, making calls, asking questions without apologizing for asking them. The attorney said something to me later that I keep coming back to. He said that most of what he sees in these situations is not malice. It's panic. People who feel like they're about to lose something or who feel like they've been somehow cheated by life. And they make a decision in a moment of fear that costs them far more than whatever they thought they were protecting. I don't think my sister is a bad person. I think she was a scared person who made a bad decision in a house still warm with loss, and I think she has to live with that. And I think I have to decide how much of my energy I want to spend holding it against her. I'm still working on that last part. Some days I'm better at it than others. Most days I go to work and clean people's teeth and come home and feed my cat and call Joel and make dinner, and that is the entire shape of my life. Ordinary and good and mine. Graham would have found this whole story very tedious. She would have told me to stop picking at it. She would have handed me a piece of apple cake and pointed me toward the garden and said something crisp and sensible about how land and blood and money have been getting tangled up together since before either of us was born, and the only thing to do is untangle what you can and let the rest go. I'm working on that too. I've thought a lot about what made the difference in all of this. Not the legal part, the attorney handled that, the bank handled that, but the part inside me that let me get through it without losing myself completely. I think it comes down to this. I kept showing up before any of this mattered. I drove down on weekends when my sister didn't. I sat in the bank office with Graham when she needed someone to sit there. I learned the branch manager's name not because I was planning for any of this, but because Graham was a person who deserved to be treated with care, and being present for that was just what you did. That's not heroism. That's just paying attention. And when things got hard, genuinely hard, the kind of hard where you're sitting alone in a dead woman's sewing room at 11 at night, reading a text that changes everything, what I had was information. I knew the attorney's number. I knew the branch manager's name. I knew the account details because I had been there, physically there, doing the unglamorous work of helping someone age with dignity. None of that was strategic, but all of it mattered when it counted. There's something in that I keep returning to. The preparation that protects you is rarely the preparation you did to protect yourself. It's usually just the residue of having been a decent person consistently over time. My sister came in at the end looking for what she felt she deserved. I had been building trust, quietly and without an audience, for 2 years. Those are not the same thing, and they do not lead to the same place. I'm not saying I handled everything perfectly. There were moments I wanted to scream at her in Graham's kitchen, and I didn't. And I don't know if that was wisdom or just exhaustion. There are still days I feel the shape of what I lost. Not the money, not the house, but the version of a sister I kept hoping she might become. That loss is real, and I don't want to dress it up as a lesson in order to make it hurt less. What I will say is that I made decisions I can live with. When the bank manager called, I had earned that call. When the attorney spoke up in that conference room, I had earned that moment too. Not by being clever, but by being consistent. By being the person who showed up, by choosing over and over again in small and unwitnessed ways to do the right thing even when no one was watching and nothing seemed to be at stake. That's the only version of cause and effect I believe in, not fate, not punishment, just the slow, accumulating weight of the choices you make when it doesn't feel like it matters. Until one Tuesday in February, it turns out it matters enormously. Graham packed her thread by color. She did that for decades, alone, in a back room with no audience. She just liked order. She liked things in their right place. I understand that better now than I ever did when she was alive.